Okay, so we looked at last time. We looked at the oxidation of ethanol with potassium dichromate to form sulfuric acid to form ethanoic acid. That's what we were doing last time. Now we're going to have a look at making ethanol. First of all, we're going to have a look at making ethanol by reacting ethene with steam. Here we go. So the idea is you react the ethene with steam. This stuff here is phosphoric acid, H3PO4, and the temperature is 300 degrees Celsius and 60 atmospheres. You can see here the temperature is quite high and the pressure is quite high, which means hopefully this is going to be quite a quick reaction. I'll come back to that later. So here's ethene. You should remember this is the formula of ethene, CnH2n. And this is definitely our formula for ethanol. We've just been covering that. This is perhaps an easier version to see. Here's ethene, carbon-carbon double bond here. And what I've done is I've looked at the steam, which is what we're actually reacting with. This stuff here, the phosphoric acid is a catalyst. I've shown water, H2O, like this. And I've deliberately shown it like this because hopefully it'll clarify exactly what happens in this reaction. So when we react it with the steam and the phosphoric acid as the catalyst at those reaction conditions. Imagine this bond here flipping up and then connecting this carbon with this hydrogen. This bond here flips down and connects this carbon with this oxygen. That's what's happened here. The bond that flips up here is my new bond, and the bond that flips down here is my new bond. So what we've done is we've made ethanol from ethene. Why would we do it like this rather than by something called fermentation? This is cheaper. Fermentation, as we'll see in a few minutes, relies on a fungus called yeast, and that can be perhaps a little bit temperamental sometimes. It's also limited in terms of its temperature, so it makes a more consistent product, and of course it's much quicker because of the temperature that we do this to. So ethanol from ethene is a very common way of making ethanol. We tend not to use ethanol from this process for purposes of drinking. We tend to do that via brewing and fermenting. This is an industrial process for making ethanol for industrial uses. Things like hand sanitizers, things like disinfecting equipment, and using ethanol as an industrial reactant for other reactions. Making ethanol from sugar is called fermentation, and that's predominantly used in the brewing industry for making beer, wine, and spirits. And essentially the reaction is reacting sugar to produce ethanol plus carbon dioxide. Here's sugar. You should know from your biology C6H12O6. And what we've got is the carbon dioxide being released in the presence of yeast, which is a biological catalyst. It needs to be around about 35, 37 degrees Celsius. That's the ideal temperature for yeast to react. If it's too cold, then the yeast will react. The reaction will just happen very, very slowly. If it's too hot, the structure of the yeast breaks down, and the phrase that we use in biology is it denatures, and that means it stops having its biological activity. It's not the right shape for that to happen, and the reaction just stops completely. It's also in the absence of air, and that's to prevent oxidation to the acid when the wine goes sour. And you'll remember from the last video that vinegar, that product of the oxidation, is called vinegar, sour wine. When you do that reaction, the observations, the yeast multiplies. And because yeast is insoluble, it gets cloudy. The temperature increases because the yeast is respiring, it's giving off energy. And thereafter, you've made your alcohol. And so what you want to do is to get hold of just your alcohol, but you need to remove it from everything else. So you'd filter or decant. Decant means pouring it to leave any solid behind, to remove the insoluble yeast. And then you would distill to purify the alcohol. Distillation is the process of separating according to boiling points. So essentially you distill and the ethanol comes off at a specific temperature. I think the boiling point of ethanol is about 70-something degrees Celsius. So you should know all of this. Have a look through that. Hopefully it's all clear. Hopefully you've got some good notes, and we'll be topping up with some practical work in lessons.